Hi, I'm Rachel Beck. My husband and I started a company called Elite Literary Book Group. And the reason why we started it was because a lot of districts are kind of going towards all choice, or maybe they don't believe in teaching the entire novel. I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that um, administrators are more interested in assessments as far as like standardized testing and so forth. So why in the world would you spend 6 weeks reading To Kill a Mockingbird? I mean, so I'm going to do that on my own. If you do well in your AP test, that saves you a course in college. It saves you money. And in order to get better at AP and to be able to make an interpretation, you need to have a lot of background knowledge in working through a novel. And the idea that, just anybody can take this book or that book and without having seen it modeled before, you can get these questions off the internet and you can look them up and you can watch SparkNotes and then everything will be fine. But it really doesn't work that way, because reading is a process, and it comes with maturity, and it actually helps you develop an emotional intelligence, because you're forced to reconcile with certain issues that you may have never discussed before. And really, this is why you should want to go to your English classes. You should want to be able to talk about issues that's going on, current events that's going on, and the story, what's the truth that's revealed in the story is the vehicle to help you do that. So the more well-read you are, not only are you going to be a better writer and communicator, but just a better human being. So if that's true, and people aren't reading and discussing literature and things like To Kill a Mockingbird, what's going to happen in terms of racism and other issues that could be discussed? People aren't going to recognize it if they don't talk about it. And if they don't recognize it, it's going to keep happening. And I think we're already seeing a little bit of that. There are about 4 or 5 hours of lectures of going through the novel. And I try to do it with a Q3 question as a focus, so that you can see where I'm headed in developing my claim statement and thesis statement, which ultimately has to reveal the work as a whole. So knowing the work as a whole, it doesn't matter what the question is, you will be able to find some way to create a claim or a thesis that, hopefully isn't obvious. The problem with SparkNotes is most everything that you get out of there, everyone else already knows. They've already thought about it. You have to explore it in a way that other people haven't explored it. So I'm going to use To Kill a Mockingbird just as an example of how I would teach this novel, and I'll do a series of it. And if you're interested, I have other videos on The Great Gatsby. You can look and see if you would be interested in that. And then if you want to take the whole course, then that's great too. So at any rate, to start off with To Kill a Mockingbird, this is not something I would write for an AP course in 12th grade. This really should be taught in pre-AP 9th grade, partly because it's coming of age. And what coming of age means is that your life is starting to reveal things that are not what you thought they would be. For example, when you're little, and hopefully if you come from a good home, people tend to treat you like you're adorable and wonderful, and everyone loves you, and your worldview is that kind of safe, loving environment. But then you go to school, and maybe people start picking on you because of the way you dress, even though you didn't pick out your clothes, especially in kindergarten. And they start to judge you for things that are completely out of your control, and superficial things, and you start to see that there's a little bit of a class structure, and the popular kids have a certain thing about them that maybe you don't have, and you start to see the world a little bit differently. And what happens as we mature, we, we, we only mature really by going through disappointments. And as we go through those disappointments, we have realizations that bring us closer to maturity. So in this case, Scout is looking at what's happening with her father as far as his ability to go and to help somebody who the town is prejudiced against, and it's between, you know, what a white person says against a black person, and he's not popular. But the kind of father that he is, even though she doesn't understand it, she gradually comes to understand him more. Because Atticus is, to me, the greatest literary hero. He floats above everybody else, and that comes with an emotional intelligence. To not be sucked in by what people say or what people think, to be able to say they're entitled to their opinion, but I have to do what I feel like is the right thing to do. Or I can't go to church and I can't tell you what to do. And if I don't live my life with integrity, then I can't teach you to do the same. And so by watching her father, she starts to understand what true courage is. And she also sees that the world is not a fair place, and that there's a lot of cruel things that happen. And even in just the Depression alone, the context of the book, looking at it from the point of view of a depression, they are without hope in a lot of ways. They have to try to lean on each other. And this is, you know, even though she criticizes the community a lot, what she is also showing is how, like for instance, when Maudie's house catches on fire, you see the community kind of comes together. You also see how the community can misunderstand people like Boo Radley, for instance. The stories of Boo Radley come basically from gossip, and sometimes it's difficult for students to understand that they shouldn't be getting their information about this person from the neighbors, because the most adequate description probably comes from Miss Maudie when she says, no, his name is Arthur, and here's what happened, you know. And what did happen? It starts with a just kind of some mischief that he and some other boys do, very minor stuff, and the option after they get caught is to be taken to this industrial kind of trade school, which actually would have ended up being a pretty good opportunity for the boys. But because Boo Radley's father was prejudiced and didn't want him alongside black people, he decided instead to just lock him up in the house and keep him out of society. So from the very beginning, you see how the punishment doesn't fit the crime. And the interest that the kids have in Boo Radley first just stems out of their imagination. I mean, it's the Depression. They don't have anything. They have nothing to play with. And it's kind of like that mysterious house that you would ride your bike, you know, next to, and you would think all these crazy things are going on in that place, and you just kind of let the imagination grow. But that's not the truth. You know, the truth of his story is revealed later. It comes out full circle later on in the novel. So I think it's important as she sets up the novel with Macomb and it being a small town and not very many things are going on in this town, she makes a reference to President Roosevelt when she says, she describes it as being very hot and there's nothing to do, there's no money to buy anything with anyways, so everyone is just sort of bored. And that's probably why they gossip so much and they're so interested and things that are happening in other people's lives because they have nothing to really look forward to. But they did have this vague optimism because they had recently been told that they had nothing to fear but fear itself. And that comes from Roosevelt. And when I used to teach this at school, I would always go through a little bit of a biographical sketch of Roosevelt because I think it's really important to see him as a president and having polio. You know, before he got polio, he really lived a charmed life. Everybody would have loved to have his life. And then, you know, this crisis happens. And I think that being kind of the microcosm of his crippling disease sort of reflected the macrocosm of a crippling nation. And it made him more empathetic to people, to poor people. He saw people's lives that were, you know, struck with poverty, and he was able to know that just from his own self-poverty of being deprived what he needed physically. And yet he was uncomplaining and always kind of gave off this strong physical appearance of walking and smiling and being happy, and that was the optimism that people believed in. And so that optimism and that dream is in the backdrop of this book. But you also get a sense of people in the neighbors and the people who are against Scout's father. And Scout, it takes a little while to get through the book because the first part of the book is really just developing the story of Scout as a coming of age story. It's also important as American characteristic of the novel, of American novels, is the point of view. If you think about having point of view from a child's point of view, it's more innocent than an older person who is conformed to society telling you what happens, because it seems through a child's eyes when they haven't been jaded and they're not as cynical and they haven't learned to hate other people. They don't have a sense of why there would be segregation in the first place. They don't understand. The first time my son kind of walked in while I was watching The Help, and he walked in through a pretty bad scene, he completely didn't understand why were they treating people this way? Why is this happening? And for those of us who have always heard about it and have seen, you know, or read books about civil rights movement and all of that, it's not new to us. You know, we understand. I said because people are stupid. I don't know what else to tell you, really, because honestly, why? You know, why does this happen? And this is what Scout has to come to terms with. And if a child can see that there's something wrong with this, then I think it has to make the adult wonder about himself. You know, why is it that a child can be more empathetic here and see that this is wrong and an adult can't? I just got finished with Catcher in the Rye, but kind of the same thing. All Holden Caulfield wants to do is catch children from going off into that phony adult world. And why it's phony is because as you become an adult and you get a job and there's certain expectations of you, you find yourself having to conform. And sometimes the more you conform to something, the better off you're going to be in terms of promotion or whatever, because you are part of the system and people will like that about you. If you're not part of the system, like me, people won't like that about you. But ultimately, you have to learn to live your own truth and be true to yourself. And that's the lesson a lot of these child narrators teach us. And that's what Atticus teaches. You can learn a lot from Atticus. So if anything else, just his maturity, opposed to everyone else, and his integrity. And the other thing I want to say, just in terms of introduction for To Kill a Mockingbird, is that this book came out of a gift. Harper Lee had some good friends who she stayed with sometimes during Christmas and watched their kids and stuff like that. And Michael Brown had the father, the husband that she was friends with. He had a one-hit wonder, which in itself is kind of a serendipitous thing to happen. And they gave Harper Lee a year off of her job, supported her, so that she could write this book. And, the longer you study literature, especially ones that have such an impact socially on our society, you start to pick up on some of these serendipitous things that happen. And you see that it's timely in a way, and as a response to some people not wanting to teach this book because of the language that may seem racist, I would ask the question, how can a book that helped the civil rights movement be racist? I mean, this is what authors are supposed to do. They're supposed to put those questions out there for people, and by creating a character like Tom Robinson, people see his humanity. And when you see another person's humanity, it doesn't matter what race or religion they are. You connect. And that's the thing, is that we learn to connect with other people through these stories because there's a shared humanity. And this is very important to teach, children and, adults these days too. If we could go back and reread some of these classics together, I think things would be very different. So please subscribe and leave me a comment. All right, thanks. Bye.